Football at 4, John McMullen at JF McMullen. Every day at this time, it's our version of mandatory Metallica right here on the Sports Bash. It is Football at 4. John McMullen, how are you, my friend?
Doing well. How are you guys?
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting? I said we talk every day of the year for 5 days a week, 352 weeks. And in my life, I think I've only seen John maybe, like 40 times ever?
Yeah, that's probably a good ballpark figure. No, it's tough. I got to be in Philly.
I think John likes it that
down
way.
By the shore.
Yeah.
But yeah,
and yet I feel that I know you so well that I can ask you these questions.
Yeah, you can tell from Mosher's perspective, it's not great seeing me.
Right. Well, it's just funny. I bring this up only because many people that I come across, my father, my girlfriend, and others, say that this is their favorite segment and that you're their favorite guest, that it must be so neat that I get to work with you. I said, I very rarely ever see John. I don't get to really see or talk, other than this 20 minutes that we talk daily. Other than that, we don't have a lot of interaction because I don't ever see you.
Well, that's what makes radio magic. You see, if you talk about things off the air, then you lose it on the air. It's not as fun.
Yeah. I did get your email today about AEW wrestling. I will get back to your email today about AEW wrestling, though. I will respond to that.
Well, I figured you might want Cody Rhodes for the show. That's a pretty big get.
Yeah. Yeah, I would be interested in that. By the way, another little quick fact. Casey Joyner has been on the show twice a week for about 10 years. I've never met the man. Never. I don't know what he looks like. I've never seen him. Yet you would think we talk so often and have I would think, good chemistry that we've sat down and had lunch. Never met the man. Couldn't pick him out of a lineup.
This is how all relationships should be, where we just have to talk to each other, but we don't have to meet or see each other.
I hear Casey on the show a lot, and for some reason, I learned, I think it was last week, I learned that he's a Steelers fan. And I learned that because
his son is a Steelers fan. No, his son is a Steelers fan.
He had a lot.
Yes,
he had a lot of Mike Tomlin angst, and I'm like, how do you think that guy's a bad coach? So I sensed I sensed a bit of fandom there. And only
he is not a Steelers. His son is a.
Well, there had to be something infiltrating that, because that guy's been
his son is a Steelers fan, and he says. He has used the word Tomlining on the show a lot in terms of that Mike Tomlin has messed up a lot of games.
I'm like, are you serious? I don't understand. I constantly talk about context. How can you complain about that stretch of Pittsburgh Steelers football? It's amazing to me.
Yeah.
People get spoiled.
All right, well, let's take – we absolutely. So let's get into some nuts and bolts of this game here. And number one, can you clear up for us the future availability of Crevon LeBlanc and Jalen Mills? How do their designations work, and when would they be available? And is LeBlanc – we know Mills would be a guy that they would bring back and want to use. Is LeBlanc definitively a guy that they would bring back if he's ready to play?
I do think Crevon is one of the guys they've earmarked for the designated to return designation. So they do plan on bringing him back when they can. Earliest that would be is after Week 8. Jalen Mills is on the regular season PUP, so this is it, Week 6. He can practice next week, and it's interesting you bring him up because he just talked today, and he said he feels great. There's no limitations. He's meeting with the doctors early next week, so he hopes to be at practice next week, and he hopes to play against the Dallas Cowboys in Week 7. So that would be huge for this team. But from his perspective, the Eagles do have a little bit of a window. Once he starts practicing, they have 3 weeks to decide whether to put him on the 53-man roster. So they don't have to activate him immediately. But once he does start practicing, that clock starts ticking, and they got to make a decision within that window. If they don't put him on the roster, then he's got to go back to the PUP list for the entire season. So those are the differences, but it looks pretty clear the Eagles certainly want Jalen Mills back, and he could be back as early as Dallas. So that's a positive development.
That was going to be my question. If he's able to practice, he will be eligible to practice next week. When they reconvene on Wednesday, John, and get him involved, how much, if any, of a role do you think he would be ready to play against Dallas, having missed all this time, if any?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a long time. It's a calendar year, basically. So it's hard to imagine you're just going to put him in as a starter. I mean, I think this game coming up against Minnesota is big in so many ways for Sidney Jones. He got pushed verbally by Doug Peterson yesterday. He's got to go out there. He's got to start. He's got to play well. And if not, he's going to have Jalen Mills in his rearview mirror, I think, pretty quickly here. So I ultimately, as you said, Jeff, I can't imagine he'd be anywhere near his normal workload, which was essentially the entire game when he was a starter. But I do think they'd like to get him mixed in as quickly as possible because this team is struggling at that position, and he's a veteran guy who knows how to play.
So when Doug says something mildly critical of you, you're definitely in trouble. When he says something very obviously critical of you, then you're really in the doghouse. I interpreted what he said about Sidney Jones this week as put up or shut up, that he is in the doghouse, and only by injury does he have a chance to get himself out of the doghouse on Sunday against the Vikings.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, this is it. The rope is running out for Sidney Jones, and as you see more guys come back, and we just talked about Jalen, Vontae Maddox, who knows? Originally, they were talking about 2 weeks, so he could be back in the mix pretty quickly. Cravon, after week 8, could be back in the mix. Now, they're both more slot guys, but it gives you bodies, and it gives you the ability to move other players around. Remember, Orlando Scandrick played well against the Jets, and he's a veteran guy. So in a couple weeks, what is a very thin position is all of a sudden going to be pretty deep as far as bodies that could potentially play. And if it gets to that point and Sidney is still Sidney and he's struggling against good receivers and he's pulling up lame when he does struggle against good receivers, I think at some point they're going to say, you know what, just sit over there and we're going to move forward with these guys.
Like, are you talking about sit over there like inactive, game day inactive?
Well, it's tough to say is Sidney going to be healthy because I think, I did the math. Forget about the Achilles in year 1, and so we're talking about his second and now into his third year. So he's played 13 of I think 21 regular season games, and he's had 4 different hamstring injuries. 4 over that span. And you heard Doug yesterday about pushing through certain things. And it's pretty clear there's levels of hamstring injuries. Ronald Darby's hurt. He's out. He's projected to be out a month. He's in the middle of that. In Sydney, he pulls up with a hamstring in Green Bay, and they're saying, well, maybe he can play next week. So it's obviously not nearly as serious. Ultimately didn't play, was just dressed in case of emergency versus the Jets. But when you couple that with Doug's words, it's pretty clear that they think he's not fighting through injuries that other players would potentially fight through. There's no other way to take those words.
So that's interesting to bring up. Let's say he has a bad game against the Vikings, stays healthy, but has a bad game, and they just feel like he is no longer someone that they can trust out there. I don't know that you can then keep him active as a backup. Then that's a special teams role, and if there's one thing we can say about Sidney Jones is that he ain't very well. So I don't know if you want him in on any of those coverage or return units. So it really seems to me like he's either going to prove that he belongs on this field in either as a base or nickel, or he ain't going to be active going forward.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's going to be difficult for him. And I think a lot of it does depend on what Jalen Mills comes back. But if it's the Jalen Mills pre-injury, and that's a big if. It's been, as I mentioned, a calendar year. So to assume he's going to be the same player, it might be a stretch. But if he does, I mean, Sydney's not playing the nickel over Avonte Maddox and Cre'Von LeBlanc when he comes back, and Orlando Scandrick. I mean, you have three guys at that point that can play inside. And Rasul has proven that he's better. So maybe he doesn't have the same traits or skill set, but he's just played better in actual NFL games, and that counts for something. Yeah, and when Darby comes back, he's your number one corner. So, yeah, there's not going to be room for him.
It's amazing. If you were to pick two colleges that you love for producing defensive backs over the last 5 or 10 years, you're picking LSU and you're picking Washington. And the Eagles have one from each.
Ohio State.
And Ohio State, that's a really good one, too. Ohio State. And Florida State, too, and they've got one from each. Florida State, LSU, and they've got one from Washington. And right now the best one, and the one everybody hopes to play, Jalen Mills, is the one that nobody wanted to even start the season. It's like they've gotten every good factory's kind of worst player, although Sidney Jones was not supposed to be one of the worst players. But it's just mind-boggling that this has been the result.
Yeah, it hasn't worked out like they envisioned. I mean, people were talking about it preseason, like this could be one of the deepest parts of this team. And then the old adage in the NFL is you can never have enough corners, and that is turned out to be the case for the second straight season for the Eagles. Just injury after injury after injury. In the case of Mills, it's just lingering for over a year. So you can never have enough of those bodies, but it seems to be all coming together that, say, by week 9, week 10, they're going to have all of those bodies they envisioned. And at that point, you're going to be in the middle of the playoff race, and that's what you're going to say. You're going to say, who are our best corners? And that's who you're going to put out there. And, you know,
how do you know who your best corners are? If Mills, okay, I saw this tweet from Mike Kay earlier that you retweeted. It says he's been running good, says he thinks once he gets off the pup, he should be able to practice. He's waiting on doctor's clearance. How do you know that he's one of your better guys if he hasn't played all year long?
I'm assuming, you know, by week 10, he would have been out there for a couple weeks. If he's able to play against the Cowboys, you kind of ramp up from there. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to see how guys play. Now, they are going to default to, and this is not going to make people happy, but I just know from talking to these coaches behind the scenes that when Ronald Darby is healthy, he's going to be back out there. They think he's their best corner by a pretty significant margin. And the second corner that has earned his stripes is Rasul Douglas. So the only way Rasul is coming off the field is if Jalen Mills really ramps up quickly and proves to be the same guy he was before the injury. Then maybe if Rasul himself starts struggling, you kind of revisit that conversation. And inside the nickel, like I said, they have three clear nickelbacks once LeBlanc comes back. And we'll see how Orlando Scandrick continues to play. He might be here. He might not even be here. He might be released by that point. But you'll have Avonte and Cre'Von and Scandrick. So it's going to be a crowded room at some point.
Now, when you opened this segment up, we talked about the fact that the Vikings could be without another one of their starting offensive linemen. We like their receivers, Thielen, Diggs. We like those guys. We like Cook a lot, too. Cousins has historically had some good games against the Eagles. Does Mike Zimmer have it in him to say, hey, let's attack this secondary. Let's go after these guys, throw the ball 30, 35, 40 times, and go after this group?
No, I don't think he has it in him. And part of it is just an old-school mentality. He is an old-school guy. He wants to run the football, which is outdated in today's NFL. But second part is they don't trust Kirk Cousins. He turns it over too much, and that's a bad place to be when you paid the guy, and all of a sudden in year 2 you want to turn him into a game manager. So not only, at least before, when you had the Kirk Cousins of Washington and even the first year in Minnesota, you had this guy who could be Jekyll and Hyde. You know, he not only would he turn the football over occasionally, and have those bad games. But he'd also have those games where he's throwing the football all over the place, 350, 400 yards, and he could gash people. But now he's kind of lost some confidence. So I think they've really mishandled him. They don't have a very good offense, and it's kind of amazing when you have arguably the best skill position players in the NFL, and you can't put together a good offense. And I think it stems from Zimmer and the offensive line.
So here's an interesting question I've been trying to ponder with myself, is that assuming the Eagles do what they normally do from run defense and give the Vikings a little bit of problems there, and it's 3rd and long, does Jim do what he's done all this year and dial it up a little bit more than he has in the past? Or do you think this is the game where he says, I'm just dropping 7 against Kirk, he's not even throwing the ball much this year, and I'm going to trust my front four more so than I have been, because he has been blitzing a little bit more this year than in past?
Yeah, I think, and he's protected guys on the back end. It's been a mix, and that's what Jim does. He kind of cobbles things together. I think it's a feel thing. I think he would like to drop into coverage. I think he understands that this team, if you look at Marvin Jones specifically, Devontae Adams, those were probably the 2 best route runners the Eagles have seen this year. They can't cover guys who can run routes, and they have 2 of the top 10 league on one team. So I think Jim knows they're going to struggle with that, and they're going to struggle with those particular receivers, so he'd rather play coverage. But a lot of that depends on early in the game, and is the pass rush getting home? If the pass rush isn't getting home, I think he goes the opposite direction, and he says, these guys can't hold up, so I got to get to Cousins. I got to force them to make mistakes. So I think he's going to start conservative, and if it doesn't work, he's going to amp it up.
Yeah, John, and, we haven't really touched a lot on the Eagles' offensive side of thing here, but would you classify the Vikings' defense as the best unit they will have faced defensively up to this point? Yeah, by a wide margin. I don't. This 6-week stretch, I think the Vikings come into this game number 4, and if they stay in the top 5, this will be the 4th or 5th straight year they've been a top 5 defense. So they're good. They're consistently good, and it's because the guys have played together, especially the playmakers, for a very long time. You have Hunter up front. He's one of the best defensive ends in football. Everson Griffin is back. He had some mental health issues last year. He's a Pro Bowl level player. They have 2 really good linebackers. They have one of the best safeties in football. And their corners have struggled, but they're really talented. They got a bunch of first-round picks at corner. So they're just really talented, and this will be, even of this 6-game stretch, you could argue Chicago is better. That's about it. I mean, this defense is good, but they're aggressive, and that's what the Eagles did in the Super Bowl year, the NFC Championship game. They used that against them, and it worked out well. The difference is that game was at Lincoln Financial Field, and it's much more difficult to pass protect on the road. So the Vikings are a lot like the Eagles. They like to get pressure with 4. They usually do get pressure with 4, but they have a more varied blitz scheme. Zimmer's one of the best sort of blitz doctors in the NFL. So they'll go in a number of different directions, and that offensive line is going to have to play like they did in Green Bay. And if they do that, I think the Eagles can win the game. Real quick, John, is losing Sproles a hit? I mean, offensively, I think in the return game you could say yes, but in the offense, do you think that that's a hit at all?
I don't think it is at all. I think it helps them at this stage. I mean, this is not Darren Sproles in his prime. I think this sets up nicely, and I just talked about what the Vikings do defensively. One of the things they do that the Eagles can take advantage of is they trust their linebackers in coverage. So I think they'll try to get Miles Sanders out on those wheel routes on linebackers. and that might be a sneaky way they can get explosive plays. And you have Jordan Howard as the main back now, and he knows Minnesota from his days in Chicago, has had a lot of success against them. So I think it helps. That's a silver lining. Now, special teams, I mean, Corey Clement missed practice again today, and let's be honest, he's been awful when he's had limited opportunities to be a punt returner anyway. I would not trust Nelson Aguilar long-term. My guess is they're going to bring up Austin Scott from the practice squad to be the punt returner, but we'll see how that shakes out.
All right, John McMullen. Follow him at JF McMullen on Twitter. John, are you a fan of a pickle? Do you like a pickle?
I'm not a big pickle guy, actually.
No. Wow, this is interesting. Mosher, no pickle. Ryan, no pickle. You, no pickle.
No,
I go pickle.
Not a big fan. Not a big fan of the smell, to be honest.
Yeah, me either.
All right.
you.
Well, 72% on Twitter like a pickle, and only 28 say no. But yet 3 out of 4 of us don't like the pickle, which is interesting.
Further proof that Twitter sucks.
Yeah. And I know Pete Thompson is not a pickle guy. So, all right, we'll leave you with that. By the way,
80%. That's 4 out of 5.
Question. Yeah, we had a question on our text board that wants to know if you think AEW is sustainable with the ratings.
Yeah, for TNT. I mean, if they hold up, and by the way, the ratings will be coming out right at 4:30 here, so I'll get those
The ratings just came in.
Twitter.
They dropped roughly 300,000 viewers.
That's
and
not good. See, nah,
and NXT dropped 55,000.
NXT, it doesn't matter because WWE gets paid. The whole thing with AEW is they don't get paid for their television, so it's more important for them to draw ratings and get advertisers. And they need to build on that first number, so that's not a good sign. And especially, I think, the baseball playoff game. So in theory, you should have a great lead-in. So that's probably not a positive development.
All right, there you go. A former WWE magazine writer, John McMullen, former NBA beat guy, and now NFL Eagles insider for 97.3 ESPN. Very versatile. By the way, tonight, hear more from John. Countdown to kickoff. Double shot of Johnny Mac today. Thank you, pal.
All right, thanks, guys.